The next step with your portraits, once you have all of the basic proportions outlined, is to double check those proportions. And one of the best ways to do that is to flip both your reference picture and your actual drawing upside down. So I'm going to play the time lapse here so you can see it. But what I do here is flip my portrait and again that reference picture upside down, and this gives you a different perspective on what you have already drawn, and you're able to see the shapes and not overthink what you think you see, but draw what's actually there. So it helps you to just block in shapes a little bit differently, give you a different perspective. So really try this out. It works better for some people than others, but take your time with it and just double check, look quickly between your picture and your drawing and see what proportions might be slightly off or out of place. And then it also helps as you're starting to shade to keep it upside down. So try to force yourself to try this, keep your drawing and picture both upside down for a while here as you're working. But what I'm doing now, once I double checked those proportions and made some adjustments on the chin and nose, is going back and just lightly shading in some of the shadows. So I'm not shading really darkly yet. I'm just looking for those areas that are the darkest and starting to lightly fill those in. Once I flip my paper upside down, you might see some areas that, again, you might have messed up or might still be slightly out of proportion. So it's a great way to just keep going back and forth with flipping your picture upside down, working for a little bit, flip it right side up, work for a little bit, and continue to do this just to keep pushing those proportions and making sure that everything really fits together nicely. You can use the shadows to help kind of outline and get proportions figured out. So as I'm doing this, I'm just really taking my time shading and looking for those darkest areas. And I'm looking at the positive and negative space of these shadows as well. So you can look at the highlights and some of the shapes those make and then just kind of outline around the highlights and fill in the shadows. So for example, on the cheek over here, I have a very strong triangle shape. So you can try to take that triangular shape and look at it on your drawing and make sure you're repeating that same angle of the negative space or of that highlight. And then I can look too in other areas where there's some of those simple shapes. So again, try to keep things as simple as possible as you're working and leave all the detail for last. But at this point, I'm flipping my picture right side up again, and this helps me to again see things that might be out of proportion, different areas that I might need to slightly erase as I'm building my layers for the shadows. So it helps to flip and change that perspective to really look at the angles and where everything should be filled in. But again, really take your time. When you get to the eyebrows, instead of doing lots of individual lines for each individual eyebrow, look at the overall shading and the overall value change on those eyebrows. So mainly the area is going to be completely a medium tone or darker than the skin, so you can just start by shading that in. And then look for the darkest areas to outline as the texture for the eyelashes or the eyebrows that I would do last. So you can see a few areas of shadow in here that I'll start to bring in. But again, I would save a lot of those smaller details for last because you may need to slightly move the eyebrow around depending on where you put things. Really look too for those darkest areas that you can keep going over and keep emphasizing to bring out the contrast. So that's something that you really need to focus on, is pushing those dark values. Make sure you still have the medium tones. And then eventually when we go in with the white charcoal, you're going to be bringing out those highlights to really give a good amount of contrast on these portraits. Remember that the white part of the eye does have some value change. There's only a few areas that will be completely white. So try to shade in the outside of those eyes and just keep building the value as you go. When you get to the hair, what works best for the hair is similar to the eyebrows. Look for the overall value change. Don't look at the individual strands of hair. There's a lot of detail there that can be a lot right away if you're just trying to be super detailed. So keep it simple. Look for the areas of shadow in the hair and the sections of highlight. So you can start by just outlining all of the darker values down at the bottom, areas at the top, and just start to shade those in. Maybe draw lines like I did here for some of the very darkest areas on the hair for highlights and shadows. But again, really keep it simple. You can see on this picture here, this main area will be a highlight, so I'm leaving most of that light on my paper, I have this sort of shape here that creates a shadow. So I'm using the value change and the charcoal to shade in that shadow. And then the darkest area of the hair here, I went over and shaded. So just really look for value change, keep it simple. Try to look at the positive and negative shapes. And that really helps to just pick out what those abstract shapes are that you can then repeat simply before going in with detail.